It's the Matt Sager Podcast, Tuesday, October 30th. And can I just ask, what the hell is happening with Disney? Seriously, it's not a rhetorical question. If you have any information about what set of crises is currently transpiring at Disney, I'd be fascinated to know. Because obviously the company's in free fall. I know there's something to be said for too many cooks in the kitchen, and I know that that's always a problem when you're run by committee. And Disney has a lot of companies under its umbrella. It's got Star Wars, it's got Marvel, and those are the brands that have me most concerned. But, I mean, there's a crisis in leadership when things are this bad in so many ways, across so many platforms and across so many brands. So, I guess let's start with Star Wars, although there is an inevitable link to Marvel. So the other night, there was an event for Black Panther. Black Panther should win many awards. It's an incredible movie. But because of the way Hollywood works, particularly the way superhero films are generally frowned upon, Marvel needs to hold events in which they showcase their films, even though the rest of the planet has seen them. Every critic has lauded them, particularly in the case of Black Panther, but they still have to make their case. They still have that old sort of baggage that comics have, where you've got to say, no, I know it's a comic book movie, but look at what an amazing hero/villain Michael B. Jordan is. Look at what an incredible performance is put on by the people playing the Dora Milaje. Look at Chadwick Boseman kicking so much ass, and look at the story that's underpinning it all. Does this not really deserve awards? Are you serious? So they have to hold events like that. But the big news story to come out of that was that Kathleen Kennedy, sort of head of Star Wars, was in attendance, and the news was leaked at that event, really stealing Black Panther's thunder, that the Boba Fett movie was canceled, and in its place will be a television series called The Mandalorian that may or may not feature Boba Fett. It certainly, in its title, is designed to invoke Boba Fett, but the timeline apparently takes place between episodes 6 and 7, and I believe in episode 6, it's not... Look, it is conceivable that Boba Fett survived episode 6, but you've got to come up with a really hackneyed, corny story for him to have survived what happened to him then. So... either that's going to happen, or it's going to be a big red herring and Boba Fett won't be involved at all, and it'll be another bunch of characters that no one cares about. And I can't imagine that anyone at Disney thinks that's a good idea, given the way Star Wars-Resistance is playing out. And Star Wars-Resistance is something I can't believe is on the air. We're now up to episode 5. The animation on this, you can find people on YouTube doing such better animation. The voice acting is appalling to me. It's... you know, the way animation works is you first see it, and so admittedly the bar gets lowered quite a bit when you see these washed out colors, when you realize it's a Star Wars series that basically takes place on a flat plane. You wouldn't know space had anything to do with it for the most part. You've got to sit through an enormous amount of boring, bland, poorly drawn, shockingly bad animation before you realize Star Wars has anything to do with it. The voice acting is horrific and the writing is just garbage. But I know that they've got a Disney streaming service coming out, and this is where Marvel comes into the picture. Because I understand why they would have canceled, for instance, as they did a couple weeks ago. Netflix canceled Marvel's Iron Fist. I certainly understand why they would do that. The first season was a complete unmitigated disaster. They rehabilitated the character to a certain extent in The Defenders, and they actually repaired him pretty well in season 2. But as Netflix original series go, at best, Iron Fist was just trash and really needed to go. What was odd was that at basically the same instant, they canceled Luke Cage, and I sort of get why that might have happened. Maybe. This is the old school 70s, 80s Marvel fan in me who feels that there is an unbreakable connection in concept in the characters. I know you would never know this from the Netflix series, which bungled this so terribly, but Luke Cage and Iron Fist have a bond that goes back decades. The two of them are inseparable. They formed their Heroes for Hire firm together. The two of them lived together and fell in love with women who lived together. I mean, they were like brothers. And I'm sure that in trying to translate the comic versions of these characters to Netflix, the idea, that DNA in the story, that Luke Cage and Iron Fist, you can't really have one without the other. It's like a Reese's peanut butter cup filled with something other than peanut butter. But then the series came out. Iron Fist was really rather awful. There was no built-in connection to Luke Cage. Luke Cage came out, had a great connection with Jessica Jones, and a great solo series. But they pulled the show. Daredevil, I know you've been wanting me to recap Season 3, and I will resume that shortly. but one thing that has struck me on multiple occasions as I've been watching this season is that unlike seasons 1 and 2 of Daredevil, this reminds me more of Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Angel, specifically in the way that those shows were written by a guy, Joss Whedon, who was very aware that at any moment the shows could be canceled, that any season could be the last. I didn't get that from any Marvel Netflix show, including the now canceled Iron Fist and Luke Cage. But I get that vibe from Daredevil Season 3, like, maybe we're in this for the long haul and maybe we're not. And I think that this is all about the Disney streaming service. It just has to be, or else there's someone insane in charge. And while that would not be a first time for Disney, I don't think they're run by a bunch of crazy, kooky, incompetent boobs. I really don't. I know that both fans of Disney and those who really despise, for instance, the Marvel brand and the Star Wars brand, like to think that this is all about politics. I don't think that's got anything to do with it. It's fascinating when you watch these critiques of Star Wars, which is really a brand in absolute crisis. The product that's coming out, I mean, Resistance is one of the worst things I've ever seen. Not worst Star Wars things, worst pieces of animation, worst writing, worst voice acting, just awful. And when you see these critiques of it, it's all these weird bearded people going, oh yeah, it's the social justice warriors because Kathleen Kennedy's a woman. And it's like, yeah, no, I don't think that's the problem. I think someone's lost their mind. How anybody thinks politics has anything to do with Star Wars? I mean, you've got to be looking at the world through a very hyper-focused lens, and I just don't think that's the way the world works. Certainly not the way that gigantic corporations like Disney work. Can corporations have political leanings? Absolutely. I worked for a radio conglomerate in 1999 in which there was a running tally, a sheet kept on the program director's office door, in which here's how much each of the employees at this radio station has contributed to the Bush campaign. And if you hadn't contributed, there was a separate list for here are the people who haven't chipped in for our nominee. It does happen. It absolutely does. I think it happens a little bit less dramatically than that example. I think my case was a rather extreme one, and I think Star Wars, frankly, has a lot more important things to do. I think there are mouths to feed, companies to continue existing, brands to be kept healthy, because at the end of the day, even politics is about money. So all of this has to be about money and success or lack thereof at some point. So I guess I just have to think that they're betting on this Disney streaming service as something that will launch new content that will last. Maybe they'll relaunch Luke Cage. It's rather unlikely that they'll relaunch Iron Fist. Maybe this whole Netflix experiment is just in need of a reboot with fresh characters. You know, the guy who was the inspiration for much of this, the guy who created Jessica Jones, who had a really definitive run on Daredevil and who did a lot of rehabilitating of Luke Cage and Iron Fist in the late 90s and especially in the early 2000s and the 2010 era. A writer named Brian Michael Bendis is really responsible for 99% of all the storytelling at the heart of the Netflix Marvel universe. And he's no longer with Marvel. So that means he's not consulting on the series, he's not creating new comics for them to draw from. That is certainly an issue. So maybe it's just about keeping the brand as healthy as possible while really planning for the future, packing the products up, preparing them to leave whatever platform they're on, and for them to land, hopefully in a healthy state, at the Disney streaming service, which is slated for launch in 2019. I've got to believe that. Because the other news which has come out are all these new shows that have been announced for tangential characters. There's going to be a Loki show. Tom Hiddleston is great, but he's kind of like, if you've ever played Dungeons and Dragons, Tom Hiddleston is sort of like the bard. He's great if you have someone to pair him with, or bounce him off of, or have him betray, or do a heroic sacrifice for. He shows his character in the ways he interacts with people. He's not a solo star. Marvel has tried to have Loki comics, and they've existed. I suppose they could be described as somewhat successful by the definitions which have come to describe success for Marvel in 2015 and beyond, which is to say sales numbering below 10,000 units. It's not a show that makes any kind of sense. Ditto, and this is no offense to Elizabeth Olsen, Scarlet Witch. But that character also is going to have a show on the new Disney streaming service, and a new show was announced just today. And that's when my theory really finally began to congeal. Because Star Wars-Resistance, I get it. Spend as little money as possible. The brand is already sort of damaged. It's not going to hurt it much more to have this shitty show. And things are sufficiently bad that if they poured millions upon millions into a fantastic show, it wouldn't really rehabilitate the brand the way it needs to be. Solo was a bomb regardless. Episode 9's future is already quite questionable. So I think this is all about making plans for this moment in time is not redeemable. So let's figure out a future, a way we can dock on dry land and make a safe, stick the landing this time. The Marvel Cinematic Universe continues to be spectacularly healthy. So much so that Venom, which is not a Marvel movie, nor a Spider-Man movie, simply by having Marvel associated with it, not being able to even mention Spider-Man, let alone having him appear, was a massive hit a couple weeks ago and continues to make billions. So the health of the Marvel brand lives on, and that is now kind of the only card left in the game. Star Wars could really fold at any moment right now. It is that bad. Internal struggles at Disney are horrific. What I'm hearing about morale, what is commonplace knowledge about morale at Lucasfilm under Disney, is shocking. There's no loyalty to the story that's been told or to the story that they're trying to tell. There's certainly no loyalty to the writers and their legacy. And these were never fans that were going to just become apathetic. The Star Wars fan base, much like the Marvel fan base, is rabid in the way that they love and connect with these characters and worlds, and rabid in the way they'll defend and attack anyone who they think is besmirching them. And that's what it is right now at Star Wars. Star Wars is basically at war with fandom. And these creators who are like, hey, I'm just doing my job. What are you coming at me for? They're biting back at fans just as hard. So the level of discourse is just sub-civilized. It's horrible. And both parties think that politics is somehow at play. The creators think that the fans are all Trump-loving fascists. And it does seem that some of them are. The more vocal ones on YouTube clearly are. But the fans think that Star Wars is doing a terrible job of it because they're trying to ram this message of women empowerment and minority empowerment, and that's why the brand is being destroyed. And I do think it's fair to say that, as all modern companies and entities do, Star Wars is trying to be a little bit more inclusive and reflective of the world it represents, and that's totally fine. It's great. It's the best thing about the brand at the moment. It's not why the stories are terrible. It's unfortunate that concurrently the stories are terrible. But for either party, the creators or the fans, to act as though this is about politics is such a misdirection, such a red herring, helps no one, and is not going to help this situation improve itself anytime soon, especially since the story that no one is talking about is the truth. It's about the Disney streaming service, which is going to be part of a much bigger story as it becomes closer to reality. Because Disney's not going to be the only one. We've already got DC Universe, they've got their awful Titans show, and hopefully slightly better Doom Patrol show, and this Harley and Ivy animation that's coming out in, I think, next month. But every company and subsidiary of that company, if you think you subscribe to a lot of streaming services now, if you've got Amazon Prime, and through Amazon Prime, maybe you're also subscribed to Starz like I did for Ash and the Evil Dead. I've kept my subscription, but I don't know how long that's going to last. But I subscribed through them to HBO and Cinemax. For a while, I was doing something called Filmstruck, but I think that's being removed. But obviously, there's Amazon Prime, at least the vanilla version with no add-ons attached, as well as Netflix and Hulu, and we need all three if we want to get our fix of the best TV available to us. But that's nothing. That's barely scratching the surface. There's now going to be this Disney streaming service, and of course the aforementioned DC Universe. It's reported that Warner's is going to have a separate streaming service for non-DC branded content. I wouldn't be at all surprised if we got the same thing from Disney, like, oh, well, you can get just Marvel for $19.99 and just Star Wars for $24.99 a la carte. Or you could get both together at a premium of $49.99. And then here's some more add-ons. Because it's not going to launch until next year. And already another series has been announced. Another one that, I would love to see this work. It does sound better than either Loki or the Scarlet Witch, but it is something that has been tested in the comics already and has failed. A show starring the Winter Soldier, Sebastian Stan, and Sam Wilson the Falcon, played by Anthony Mackie. Those characters first met, of course, in Captain America the Winter Soldier, have had many Marvel movies together since. They're both great actors, and they both portray fascinating characters. But a show for the two of them, let alone Loki and the Scarlet Witch, even the best of these Marvel shows, including Daredevil, which, again, I'm happily preparing to review Season 3, Episode 2 for you. The decompressed writing that is required to make a series for each of these, even the ones I really love, like the first season of Daredevil, The first season of Jessica Jones, the best of these, they needed to be 5 hours or to have a much greater writing staff working for a much longer time. Because what ends up happening is you have whole episodes where really nothing happens, or whole episodes where it's just 9 different characters telling their different take on one scene. And it's not because that's a great way to tell a story, which it can be, but it has not been in this case. It's because they've got to fill out 10 episodes or else it's not a season. And maybe the Disney streaming service will be different. Maybe they'll say, hey, we've got a Loki and the Scarlet Witch series. Each of them is going to be 5 episodes. That would probably be great. If they're 10 or more, and if they're not putting in the kind of effort that needs to be, put it this way, if they're putting in Star Wars-resistance kind of money and effort, I don't know what any of this is for. Fans are not as loyal, clearly, as Disney seems to think. And fans who bail are not always Nazis. It is true that the loud ones are always going to be Nazis. That's true of any situation. But I know a lot of people who have bailed on comics completely, Marvel in particular, and Star Wars fans. This is a very binary category of person. There are Star Wars diehards who just simply love everything that is prefixed Star Wars. Whatever follows, whatever the story is, whatever the medium, whatever the story, whatever the genre, they're on board. Then there's the rest who are like, you know what? I tried with The Force Awakens. Rogue One was pretty good. Last Jedi just really killed it for me, and Solo, oh boy. I would welcome anyone to defend Solo to me. To defend such a great cast, with such a potentially great story, with such a wasted 2.5 hours of film time. I hope that Disney has a plan for when all this is over, because right now, this is just a brand in free fall. And a lot of good people working there, and a lot of great stories, a legacy, decades of stories, and franchises. Oh, I really wish them the best, but I am genuinely concerned. That's my scary pre-Halloween forecast for Disney, that I hope it gets better. I hope that there's a plan. Anyway, get in touch with the Matt Sager podcast. I'd love to have you on the show, answer your questions, promote your products, whatever. Email matt@mattsager.com or call me at 646-535-4788. You can also hit me up on social media. On Twitter, I'm @MattSager. Facebook, The Matt Sager, where I've also got a voiceover page, Matt Sager VO. And this podcast page is Matt Sager Podcast. On Instagram, I'm Real Matt Sager. And I've got a million more social media links, along with articles, blog posts, my voiceover reels, more contact information, archived back episodes of this podcast, and tons more. You can find all that at mattsagervoiceover.com.